Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UHS Vengeance and watched the stars through the main viewport. The massive ship moved through space like a metal whale hunting in dark waters. Around him, the bridge crew worked at their stations with quiet focus. The soft hum of computers and life support systems filled the air. Lisa Carter sat at the tactical station, checking weapon systems for the third time that day. Her fingers moved over the control panel with practiced ease. The rail guns were ready, and the plasma torpedoes were loaded. Everything showed green on her display. She looked up at Morrison and gave him a small nod. Ryan Hayes worked at the communications console, listening to the usual chatter from other ships in the fleet. Supply reports came in from the cargo vessels. Patrol updates arrived from the scout ships. Nothing unusual had happened in weeks. The Outer Rim territories were peaceful and boring. The 12 ships of Morrison's fleet moved in formation through the void. Destroyers flanked the main group while cruisers held the center. The Vengeance led them all with its heavy armor and massive guns. They were heading home to Earth after months of routine patrol duty. Morrison was about to order a course change when Hayes suddenly straightened in his chair. Strange sounds came from his headset. He adjusted the controls and frowned at his screen. The signals were weak and broken up. He turned to look at Morrison with confusion in his eyes. "Admiral, I'm picking up something odd," Hayes said. His voice carried across the quiet bridge. "It sounds like a distress call, but the language is unknown. The signal is very weak and breaking up badly." Morrison walked over to the communications station and put on a spare headset. The sounds that came through were unlike anything he had heard before. High-pitched tones mixed with clicking sounds. The pattern seemed deliberate like speech, but no human language sounded like this. "Can you clean it up?" Morrison asked. Hayes worked his controls, and slowly the signal became clearer. The alien voice carried desperation and fear. Even without understanding the words, Morrison could hear the pain. Dr. Amanda Foster hurried onto the bridge from her lab. The tall woman wore a white coat over her uniform. Her specialty was alien biology, but she also knew several Earth languages. She had been studying the few alien artifacts humans had found over the years. "I heard about the signal," Foster said as she approached the communication station. "May I listen?" Morrison handed her the headset, and she closed her eyes to focus. The alien voice continued its desperate message. Peter Kim joined them from the linguistics department. The young man was an expert in language patterns and had helped decode ancient Earth texts. He brought a portable computer and began recording the alien transmission. "The structure suggests intelligence," Kim said after listening for several minutes. "This is definitely language, not just random noise. The speaker sounds distressed and keeps repeating certain word groups." Foster nodded in agreement. "The emotional content is clear even without translation. This being is asking for help. The fear in the voice is unmistakable." Morrison felt a cold weight in his stomach. In all of human space exploration, they had never encountered living aliens. They had found ruins and artifacts, but no actual alien species. Now they were listening to what sounded like a cry for help from across the void. The signal continued. For another hour, with Kim and Foster working to understand it, they identified what seemed to be numbers and location references. Slowly, a picture began to form of beings under attack and facing destruction. Captain Tony Brooks arrived from the destroyer UHS Reaper via shuttle. The older man had been Morrison's friend for 20 years. He listened to the alien transmission with growing concern written on his weathered face. "This could be a trap," Brooks said quietly. "We know nothing about what's out there. Following unknown signals into deep space is dangerous." Morrison understood his friend's caution, but something about the alien voice touched him deeply. The desperation reminded him of human refugees he had seen during the colony wars. No being should face extinction alone. Kate Sullivan worked at the navigation station plotting possible courses to the signal's origin. The young officer had excellent instincts for stellar cartography. Her calculations showed the transmission came from a star system far beyond human space. The signal originated approximately 40 light-years from our current position, Sullivan reported. It would take us 6 days at maximum hyperspace speed to reach that location. Danny Torres spoke up from the engineering station where he monitored the ship's systems. The veteran engineer knew every bolt and wire on the Vengeance. His dark eyes showed concern as he studied power consumption reports. "We have enough fuel and supplies for extended operations," Torres said. "But if we're going into unknown space, we should prepare for anything. I recommend battle stations and full defensive measures." Morrison walked to the center of the bridge and stared at the main screen showing star charts. The alien signal continued its desperate plea in the background. He thought about humanity's long history of violence and war. Perhaps they could use their experience to help instead of harm. Colonel Frank Davis contacted the bridge from the Marine quarters. The tough soldier commanded the elite troops aboard the fleet's ships. His voice came through the intercom with military precision. "Admiral, my Marines are ready for anything," Davis said. "If we're responding to a distress call, we should prepare for combat operations. Unknown threats require maximum readiness." Major Helen Martinez added her voice to the conversation. The experienced officer led the special operations teams. Her soldiers were trained for the most dangerous missions. "Sir, we have full combat loads and all equipment checked," Martinez reported. The troops are eager for action after months of routine patrol duty. Greg Walsh entered the bridge carrying data tablets. The intelligence officer had been analyzing what little information they had about deep space. His job was to assess threats and opportunities. "Admiral, our long-range sensors show no immediate dangers in the target system," Walsh said. "However, we have no data about that region of space. We would be going in blind." Morrison listened to his officers and weighed their advice. The safe choice was to ignore the signal and continue home to Earth. The dangerous choice was to investigate and possibly help unknown aliens in distress. Foster and Kim continued working on the translation. They had identified several key words that seemed to indicate systematic destruction. The aliens were describing attacks on their cities and people. "Admiral, I believe they're describing genocide," Foster said with horror in her voice. "The patterns suggest coordinated attacks designed to eliminate their entire species." Kim nodded grimly. "They keep mentioning something they call the hegemony. It appears to be the force attacking them. They also reference Deathworlders, which seems to be their term for warrior species." Morrison felt his jaw tighten. Genocide was humanity's greatest shame. The species had nearly destroyed itself through war and hatred. If aliens were facing the same fate, then humans had a moral duty to help. "All ships prepare for hyperspace jump," Morrison announced. His voice carried across the bridge with quiet authority. "We're going to investigate this signal and render assistance if possible." Brooks shook his head but did not argue. He knew Morrison well enough to recognize that determined tone. The Admiral had made his decision, and nothing would change his mind. The fleet began preparations for the jump to hyperspace. Engineers checked the drives while navigators plotted the course. Marines loaded weapons and checked their gear. The ships hummed with activity as crews prepared for the unknown. Morrison stood alone at the viewport and watched the stars. Somewhere out there, aliens were dying and calling for help. Humanity would answer that call regardless of the danger. It was the right thing to do. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Zilani system and immediately faced a scene of destruction. Massive alien warships surrounded a blue-green planet that glowed with the fires of orbital bombardment. Explosions bloomed across the surface like deadly flowers as beam weapons struck cities and forests. Morrison stared at the main screen in shock. The attacking vessels were enormous compared to human ships. Their hulls showed strange designs with sharp angles and dark metal. Weapon ports glowed with malevolent light as they continued their systematic destruction of the world below. "My God," Lisa Carter whispered from the tactical station. Her instruments showed dozens of enemy contacts. The largest ship measured over 5 kilometers long and bristled with weapons. "Admiral, we're badly outnumbered." The alien fleet noticed the human arrival, but showed no immediate concern. Several smaller vessels moved to investigate while the bombardment continued. Morrison watched through the viewport as cities burned on the planet's surface. Ryan Hayes worked frantically at his communication station, trying to establish contact. The alien distress signals had stopped, but his equipment picked up new transmissions from the attacking fleet. The language was different from the original callers. Dr. Amanda Foster ran scans on the alien vessels, while Peter Kim analyzed their communications. The ship showed technology beyond human understanding, but their actions were unmistakably hostile. They were methodically destroying everything on the planet below. "Admiral, I'm detecting escape pods launching from the surface," Kate Sullivan reported from navigation. "Small craft are trying to flee the bombardment, but many are being destroyed by fighter patrols." Morrison felt rage building in his chest as he watched the slaughter. These aliens were not just attacking military targets, they were systematically exterminating an entire civilization. The refugee ships carried families and children trying to escape death. Commander Steve Jackson prepared to launch reconnaissance drones from his cruiser UHS Defender. The veteran officer wanted better intelligence on enemy capabilities before engaging. His sensors showed the attacking fleet had superior numbers and firepower. "Sir, recommend we observe and gather intelligence before taking action," Jackson suggested over the communication link. "We need to understand what we're facing before committing to battle." Morrison nodded grimly, but his eyes remained fixed on the burning planet. Every minute of delay meant more deaths below. The moral calculus was simple even if the military situation was complex. The largest alien warship finally turned toward the human fleet. Its massive bulk moved with surprising grace through space. Weapon ports began to glow as targeting systems, locked onto Morrison's ships. A new voice came over the communication system, speaking in harsh tones. Peter Kim worked quickly to translate using linguistic patterns from the original distress call. The message became clear after several minutes of analysis. "They're demanding we leave immediately," Kim reported. "The speaker claims authority over this system and warns us not to interfere. They call themselves the hegemony and consider all other species inferior." Morrison felt his hands clench into fists. The arrogance in the alien voice reminded him of human tyrants from Earth's bloody history. These beings saw themselves as superior and other species as expendable. "Open a channel," Morrison ordered. Hayes nodded and activated the communication system. The Admiral's voice carried across space with quiet determination. "This is Admiral Jake Morrison of the United Earth Fleet. We are responding to a distress call from this system. Cease your attacks on civilian targets immediately or face the consequences. The alien response came quickly, filled with what sounded like laughter. The voice spoke in contemptuous tones that needed no translation. These beings viewed humans as insects to be brushed aside. Danny Torres reported from engineering that the ship's weapons were fully charged and ready for combat. The railguns could penetrate most known armor, while the plasma torpedoes carried devastating explosive power. All ships, battle stations, Morrison announced. Prepare to engage enemy forces. Rules of engagement are weapons free against military. Targets only. The human fleet spread into combat formation with destroyers taking point positions. Lisa Carter armed all weapon systems and began targeting the nearest hegemony vessels. Her tactical display showed optimal firing solutions. The first exchange of fire revealed the technological gap between the fleets. Hegemony energy weapons struck human shields with tremendous force, but the Earth ship's defensive systems held. Human railgun rounds punched through alien armor like paper. Carl Mitchell coordinated the weapons fire from his station on the bridge. The experienced gunner had fought in the colony wars and knew how to maximize damage against superior numbers. His targeting was precise and deadly. The first hegemony ship to take human fire exploded in a brilliant flash. The aliens had not expected such devastating firepower from the smaller human vessels. Their contempt quickly changed to surprise and concern. Morrison watched with grim satisfaction as his fleet demonstrated human military capabilities. Earth's violent history had taught valuable lessons about warfare and technology. These aliens were about to learn those lessons the hard way. Marine Lieutenant Nicole Rogers monitored the rescue operations as human shuttles raced to collect refugee ships fleeing the planet. Her job was to provide security for the evacuation efforts while the fleet engaged enemy forces. The refugees they rescued told horrifying stories through emergency translation programs. The Zalani were a peaceful species that had never developed advanced weapons. They were helpless against the hegemony's systematic extermination campaign. Jenny Walsh worked with the alien refugees, trying to understand their language and situation. The young translator had studied alien linguistics in school, but had never expected to use those skills in combat conditions. "Admiral, the refugees are describing concentration camps on the surface," Walsh reported with horror in her voice. "The hegemony is not just destroying cities, they're conducting experiments on captured civilians." Foster's medical scans of the rescued aliens revealed evidence of torture and biological testing. The hegemony was using living beings as laboratory subjects for weapons development. The cruelty was systematic and deliberate. Commander Steve Jackson led a stealth reconnaissance mission to gather intelligence on hegemony ground operations. What his team discovered on the planet's surface would haunt them forever. Hegemony soldiers were using Zalani children as living shields while advancing. On refugee camps, the aliens showed no mercy for age or innocence. They saw all other species as resources to be exploited or eliminated. Rogers witnessed the torture facilities where hegemony scientists forced captured Zalani researchers to develop biological weapons. Those who refused faced horrific punishment. The scenes reminded human observers of their own species' darkest chapters. The evidence of genocide triggered something primal in the human crews. Earth's violent evolution had created a species capable of terrible vengeance when innocents were threatened. The hegemony had awakened humanity's protective fury. Morrison studied the tactical situation and made a critical decision. The human fleet was outnumbered, but not outmatched. Their weapons technology and tactical coordination gave them advantages the aliens had not expected. "All ships, commence full offensive operations," Morrison ordered. "Priority targets are bombardment, platforms attacking civilian areas. Show these aliens what happens when they threaten the innocent." The battle intensified as human ships pressed their attack. Hegemony vessels found themselves facing opponents who fought with unprecedented coordination and determination. The Earth. Fleet moved like a pack of wolves hunting larger prey. Dr. Foster studied captured hegemony soldiers and made a disturbing discovery. These beings were genetically modified creatures bred specifically for warfare. They lacked individual thought or empathy. The hegemony had created perfect soldiers without souls. The revelation explained the systematic cruelty of the alien attacks. These soldiers were not evil by choice, but by design. They were biological weapons pointed at innocent species across the galaxy. Morrison realized that the threat extended far beyond this single system. The hegemony was conducting genocide on a galactic scale. Humanity faced an enemy that would never stop expanding and destroying until someone stopped them. The Admiral made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. Earth could not fight this war alone, but neither could they ignore it. The time had come to call for reinforcements and prepare for total war. Morrison stood in his private quarters reviewing the evidence his teams had gathered about hegemony atrocities. Data tablets covered his desk showing images and reports that would shock any civilized being. The scale of the genocide was beyond anything humanity had imagined possible. Commander Julia Evans waited near the door with her travel bag packed. The experienced officer had volunteered for the most important mission of her career. She would carry the evidence back to Earth and convince the government to mobilize everything humanity possessed. "Julia, you understand what's at stake," Morrison said without looking up from the horrific images. "This isn't just about the Zilani anymore. The hegemony is systematically eliminating entire species across multiple star systems." Evans nodded, grimly. She had seen the refugee testimonies and the biological samples Dr. Foster had collected. The evidence painted a picture of industrial-scale murder that surpassed humanity's worst historical nightmares. The data included recordings of hegemony experiments on sentient beings. Scientists had been dissecting living aliens to understand their biology and develop species-specific weapons. The cruelty was methodical and clinical. "I'll make them understand," Evans promised. "Earth needs to see what we're facing out here. This enemy won't stop with alien species. They'll come for humanity eventually." Morrison finally looked up from the evidence with exhaustion in his eyes. He had been fighting a holding action for weeks while waiting for reinforcements that might never come. His small fleet was slowly being worn down. Evans took the sealed data containers and headed for the hangar bay. Her fastest courier ship waited with engines already warming. The journey to Earth would take 2 weeks at maximum hyperspace speed. Every day of delay meant more deaths. Meanwhile, the remnants of Morrison's fleet continued their desperate fight against overwhelming odds. The hegemony had brought massive reinforcements to the Zilani system. Human ships darted between the larger, alien vessels like insects attacking giants. Captain Elena Rodriguez commanded the stealth operations that had become humanity's primary tactic. Her ship UHS Shadow used advanced cloaking technology to strike hegemony supply lines and rescue trapped civilians. The rescue missions revealed the full horror of hegemony occupation. Rodriguez's teams found mass graves containing millions of Zilani remains. The aliens had been executing prisoners faster than they could process them for experiments. Major Sam Turner worked with the surviving Zalani resistance fighters, led by a warrior poet named Thelnos. The alien had lost his entire family to hegemony, death squads, but continued fighting with desperate courage. Turner learned that the Zalani had been peaceful for thousands of years before the invasion. They possessed advanced technology for medicine and agriculture, but had never developed weapons of war. The hegemony had targeted them specifically for this reason. Lieutenant Barry Chen discovered evidence that the genocide was part of a larger pattern. The hegemony had been systematically eliminating peaceful species while enslaving aggressive ones. They were reshaping the galaxy according to their twisted vision. Dr. Tracy Adams worked around the clock treating rescued Zalani civilians. Her medical bay had become a refuge for beings showing signs of systematic torture and biological experimentation. The injuries were beyond anything in human medical texts. Adams discovered that hegemony scientists had been trying to weaponize diseases specific to different alien species. They wanted to eliminate entire populations without damaging planets or resources. The biological warfare program was vast and sophisticated. Back on Earth, Commander Evans arrived at United Earth Defense Headquarters with her evidence. She demanded an immediate meeting with General Marcus Webb and the Defense Council. The gravity in her voice convinced them to grant the audience. Webb was a veteran of the colony wars who had seen humanity at its worst. He thought he understood the depths of cruelty that intelligent beings could reach. The evidence from the Zalani system proved him wrong. "General, we're not just looking at one act of genocide," Evans explained as she presented the data. "This is systematic extermination on a galactic scale. The hegemony has been doing this for centuries." The holographic displays showed hegemony concentration camps across dozens of star systems. Each facility contained thousands of beings from different species. The aliens were conducting comparative studies to improve their killing efficiency. Webb studied the tactical analyses Morrison had included with the evidence. The hegemony possessed superior numbers and technology, but their tactics were predictable. They relied on overwhelming force rather than strategic thinking. "What does Morrison recommend?" Webb asked. Evans activated another display showing the Admiral's strategic assessment. The plan was audacious and would require everything Earth possessed. "He wants to mobilize the entire fleet," Evans said. "Every ship, every soldier, every weapon we can deploy. This enemy won't negotiate or retreat. They have to be completely destroyed." President Susan Clark arrived at the briefing after receiving an emergency alert. The civilian leader had hoped to avoid major military conflicts during her administration. The evidence forced her to confront an ugly reality. Clark watched the recordings of hegemony atrocities with growing horror. The torture facilities reminded her of humanity's own shameful history. The difference was that these aliens were conducting genocide as official policy. "How many beings have they killed?" Clark asked. The question hung in the air like a death sentence. Evans consulted her data tablets and provided estimates that staggered the listeners. Conservative estimates suggest over 50 billion sentient beings across multiple species, Evans reported. The hegemony has been conducting this campaign for at least 2 centuries. The number was almost incomprehensible. 50 billion individuals with families, dreams, and cultures had been systematically murdered. The scope of the crime demanded action regardless of the cost. Webb began calculating what Earth could deploy against such an enemy. The United Fleet consisted of over 300 major vessels plus support ships. The Marine Corps could field 2 million soldiers trained for planetary assault, We would be committing everything we have, Webb warned. If this goes badly, Earth will be defenseless against other threats. Clark considered the moral implications of both action and inaction. Humanity could ignore the distant genocide and remain safe. Or they could risk everything to stop an evil that would eventually threaten Earth anyway. General Kevin Ross joined the discussion via holographic link from the military academy. The strategy expert had been studying hegemony tactics and found disturbing patterns in their expansion. "Madam President, their movement toward our sector is inevitable," Ross explained. "They eliminate peaceful species first, then focus on potential threats. Humanity will be on their list eventually." The strategic analysis showed that Earth had perhaps a decade before hegemony scouts reached human space. The aliens would not ignore a species that possessed advanced military technology and aggressive tendencies. Admiral Patricia Young commanded the Home Defense Fleet and had been preparing for this possibility since receiving Morrison's initial reports. Her forces could be ready for deployment within 6 months. "Ma'am, our shipyards are already working overtime," Young reported. "We can have the largest fleet in human history ready for combat operations. The crews are eager to respond to this threat." Clark made the decision that would define her presidency and possibly save galactic civilization. She authorized the largest military mobilization in human history. Every resource would be committed to stopping the hegemony. The mobilization order went out across Earth's colonies and military installations. Shipyards accelerated production schedules while academies graduated officers early. The entire human species prepared for total war. Meanwhile, Morrison's battered fleet continued their desperate holding action in Zalani space. They had saved thousands of civilians, but millions more remained trapped on the surface. Time was running out for the survivors. The Admiral received Evans' message confirming that reinforcements were coming. The entire Earth fleet would arrive in 6 months to begin the largest military operation in human history. Morrison just had to keep fighting until they arrived. Thelnos brought disturbing intelligence from the Zalani resistance. Hegemony forces were accelerating their extermination schedule. They wanted to eliminate all witnesses before human reinforcements could arrive. Morrison realized he was fighting more than a battle for territory. This was a race against genocide itself. Every day his fleet delayed the enemy meant more innocent lives saved from systematic murder. The Admiral looked at his remaining ships and made a grim calculation. They could hold out for 6 months if they were careful and lucky. The question was whether any Zalani would still be alive when the cavalry finally arrived. Morrison stood on the bridge of his damaged flagship, watching sensors that showed impossible readings. Massive hyperspace signatures were appearing throughout the Zalani system. The energy patterns were far too large for any known vessels, but the identification codes were unmistakably human. 6 months of desperate fighting had reduced his fleet to barely functional ships held together by determination and spare parts. The hegemony had pressed their attacks relentlessly while accelerating the genocide on the planet below. Morrison's forces had saved what civilians they could, but millions more had died. Lisa Carter worked at her tactical station with bandages covering burns from the last battle. Her instruments showed hyperspace portals opening across a volume of space larger than most star systems. The scale was beyond anything she had ever imagined. "Admiral, I'm reading 50 major contacts emerging from hyperspace," Carter reported with awe in her voice. "No, make that 100 contacts. Sir, they're still coming." The first ships to emerge were the massive dreadnoughts of Admiral Patricia Young's battle fleet. Each vessel measured over 2 kilometers long and bristled with the most advanced weapons Earth could produce. Their hulls gleamed with fresh armor and new paint. Morrison felt tears forming in his eyes as he watched Earth's response to his call for help. The armada that emerged from hyperspace was the largest military force humanity had ever assembled. Every ship that could fight had been sent to end the hegemony threat. Ryan Hayes received an incoming transmission from the flagship UHS Liberation. Admiral Young's face appeared on the main screen with grim determination written in every line. Behind her, the bridge of the massive vessel showed hundreds of crew members working with perfect coordination. "Jake, sorry we're late," Young said with a slight smile. "We brought some friends to help with the pest control problem you reported." The humor was typical of Young, but Morrison could see the controlled fury in her eyes. The evidence he had sent to Earth had affected everyone who saw it. The entire human military was here for revenge and justice. Wave after wave of ships continued emerging from hyperspace. Cruisers and destroyers took formation around the dreadnoughts, while carriers launched fighter squadrons that darkened space with their numbers. Support vessels moved to establish field hospitals and supply depots. Captain Laura Peterson commanded the humanitarian fleet that had been specially equipped for rescue operations. Her ships carried medical facilities and temporary housing for millions of refugees. Earth was prepared to save every survivor they could find. The hegemony fleet that had been systematically destroying the Zalani homeworld suddenly found itself facing impossible odds. Their sensors showed human vessels appearing, faster than they could count. The arrogant aliens who had dismissed Morrison's small force now faced the full might of humanity. Overlord Keth commanded the hegemony forces from his massive battleship Dominion. The alien warlord had conducted dozens of genocides across the galaxy. He had never encountered resistance like this before. Most species fled or died quickly when faced with superior force. Young assumed overall command of the combined human fleet, while Morrison retained tactical control of his veteran units. His battered ships had gained invaluable experience fighting the hegemony. They would lead the assault while the fresh forces provided overwhelming firepower. Colonel Rachel Stone led the orbital assault troops aboard specialized landing craft. Her soldiers had trained for 6 months specifically for this mission. They understood the enemy tactics and weaknesses that Morrison's forces had discovered through bitter experience. The space battle began when hegemony forces opened fire on the nearest human vessels. Their energy weapons struck shields that absorbed the impacts without significant damage. Earth's defensive technology had been upgraded based on combat reports from Morrison's fleet. Major Chris Hamilton coordinated the human response from the command cruiser UHS Retribution. His tactical computers identified priority targets while maintaining fire discipline to avoid civilian casualties. The orbital bombardment platforms attacking the planet below were marked for immediate destruction. The first exchange of fire demonstrated humanity's technological advancement during the 6-month preparation period. Human weapons had been specifically designed to counter hegemony defenses. Railguns fired projectiles that punched through alien armor like tissue paper. Captain Derek Foster commanded the massive carrier UHS Vengeance, which launched squadron after squadron of fighters. The small craft swarmed around hegemony vessels, like angry insects. Their pilots had trained extensively using combat data from Morrison's encounters. Lieutenant Commander Megan Clark led the first fighter wave against enemy positions. Her squadron had studied every aspect of hegemony ship design and tactics. They knew exactly where to strike for maximum damage. The battle revealed why humans were feared across the galaxy as Deathworlders. Earth's high gravity and violent evolution had created beings with superior reflexes and spatial awareness. Human pilots could outfly any alien species they had encountered. The hegemony's tactical doctrine relied on overwhelming force against inferior opponents. They had never faced enemies who could match their technology while surpassing their tactical coordination. The human fleet moved like a single organism with deadly purpose. Overlord Keth watched his carefully planned genocide operation collapse under human assault. His bombardment platforms were being systematically destroyed, while his warships faced opponents that refused to break under fire. These humans fought with terrifying determination. Young observed the battle from her command center and made strategic decisions based on real-time intelligence. Her forces had trained extensively for this moment. Every officer knew their role in the largest military operation in human history. The hegemony attempted to use their traditional intimidation tactics by threatening to execute remaining prisoners. The aliens expected humans to retreat rather than risk civilian casualties. This fundamental misunderstanding of human nature proved fatal. Morrison's response to the threat was immediate and devastating. Human forces launched simultaneous attacks on every hegemony position, while special operations teams stormed the prison facilities. The aliens discovered that threatening innocents only made humans fight harder. Major Ashley Bell led special forces, units equipped with the most advanced combat gear Earth could produce. Her soldiers had studied the prison camp layouts and guard rotations. They moved through enemy positions like ghosts delivering death. The rescue operations proceeded with clockwork precision as human forces overwhelmed hegemony defenders. Captain Roy Evans coordinated the evacuation of liberated facilities, while medical teams treated survivors of systematic torture and experimentation. Dr. Foster worked frantically to save beings who had endured months of biological testing. The hegemony. Experiments had pushed many subjects to the edge of death. Her medical knowledge was all that stood between the survivors and complete breakdown. The space battle reached its climax when human dreadnoughts engaged the massive hegemony flagship. Overlord Keth's personal vessel was a kilometer longer than any human ship, but found itself outgunned by coordinated fire from multiple opponents. Young coordinated the final assault, while Morrison's veteran crews provided tactical expertise. The combination of fresh firepower and hard-won experience proved unstoppable. The hegemony fleet began to collapse under relentless human pressure. Keth made a desperate attempt to ram his flagship into the nearest human vessel. The alien warlord preferred death to defeat and capture. His plan failed when human fighters disabled his engines, while dreadnoughts pounded his weapon systems. The surrender of the hegemony flagship marked the end of organized resistance in the Zilani system. Human forces had achieved complete victory in less than 18 hours. The aliens who had conducted genocide for centuries were themselves facing annihilation. Morrison stood on his bridge and watched the rescued Zilani civilians being transferred to hospital ships. Thousands of beings who had faced certain death were now safe under human protection. The rescue operation was just beginning. Young contacted Morrison with orders for the next phase of operations. Earth's Armada would not stop with saving one system. They were going to hunt down every hegemony installation and end the galactic genocide permanently. Commander Brad Jones worked through the night analyzing intelligence gathered from captured hegemony vessels. The data revealed a network of concentration camps and military installations spanning dozens of star systems. The true scope of the galactic genocide was finally becoming clear. Jones spread holographic star charts across the briefing room table, while Admiral Young and her senior staff studied the horrific evidence. Each red marker represented a facility where millions of sentient beings awaited execution. The hegemony had industrialized murder on an unimaginable scale. The central command structure is located here on Dominion Prime, Jones explained while highlighting a heavily fortified star system. Intelligence indicates this is where they coordinate all genocidal operations and conduct their worst experiments. Young studied the tactical challenges of assaulting such a heavily defended target. Dominion Prime was surrounded by orbital defense, platforms, and protected by the largest hegemony fleet concentration. The fortress world would not fall easily. Dr. Foster entered the briefing with reports that made everyone in the room feel sick. Her analysis of rescued prisoners revealed systematic torture and biological experimentation designed to create weapons targeting specific species. The cruelty was methodical and scientific. "They're not just killing for territory or resources," Foster said with controlled anger. "The hegemony is conducting research to make genocide more efficient. They want to eliminate entire species without damaging planets." The revelation added urgency to the human mission. Every day of delay meant more innocent beings would die in hegemony laboratories. The aliens were perfecting industrial-scale murder while treating sentient life as raw material for weapons research. General Lisa Morgan commanded the ground assault forces aboard the massive troop transports. Her Marines had trained extensively for urban warfare against fortified positions. They understood that Dominion Prime would be the bloodiest battle in human history. Morrison's intelligence network had identified the locations of major prison facilities on the fortress world. Millions of beings from dozens of species were being held in conditions that violated every concept of civilized behavior. The rescue operation would require perfect coordination. Young authorized Operation Deathworld, fury after consulting with Earth's political leadership. President Clark had given complete authority to the military commanders. The politicians understood that this was humanity's moment to define itself on the galactic stage. The human armada began moving toward Dominion Prime with grim determination. Every crew member understood the stakes involved. They were not just fighting for victory, but for the moral soul of galactic civilization. Captain Roy Evans led advanced scouts that confirmed the worst fears about hegemony operations. His reconnaissance teams discovered genetic laboratories where alien scientists were breeding modified soldiers from captured prisoners. The biological warfare program was vast and sophisticated. Major Ashley Bell received intelligence about hegemony plans to execute all prisoners if human forces approached the fortress world. The aliens intended to eliminate witnesses rather than allow their crimes to be exposed. Time was running out for the survivors. The final approach to Dominion Prime revealed the full defensive power of the hegemony's central stronghold. Massive orbital platforms surrounded the planet like a metal shell. Each station contained enough firepower to destroy a small fleet. Young deployed her forces in the formation that Earth's tacticians had developed specifically for this assault. Dreadnoughts would engage the orbital defenses while carriers provided fighter support. The ground assault would begin once the space battle was decided. Overlord Keth had been transported to Dominion Prime as a prisoner, but his replacement proved equally ruthless. Supreme Commander Vex had built his reputation on efficient genocide and would not surrender without destroying everything he controlled. The space battle began when human forces entered the outer defense perimeter. Hegemony platforms opened fire, with weapons that could crack continents. The energy beams struck human shields with tremendous force, but the Earth vessels pressed their attack. Morrison led the veteran ships of his original fleet in the first assault wave. His crews had learned to fight the hegemony through months of bitter experience. They knew exactly how to exploit weaknesses in alien defensive systems. Captain Derek Foster's fighters swarmed through the defensive grid like a metal hurricane. The pilots had trained specifically for this moment, using every scrap of intelligence about hegemony tactics. Their attack runs were coordinated with surgical precision. The orbital battle raged for hours as human forces systematically destroyed each defensive platform. Earth's weapons technology proved superior to alien defenses, but the price was measured in damaged ships and wounded crews. General Morgan launched the ground assault while the space battle continued overhead. Her landing craft descended through a storm of defensive fire to reach the planet's surface. The Marines faced fortified positions that had never been successfully attacked. Sergeant Tim Murphy led his squad through 18 hours of continuous combat without rest or resupply. The veteran soldier had fought in Earth's colonial wars, but nothing had prepared him for the systematic evil they discovered on Dominion Prime. The prison facilities contained horrors that challenged human understanding. Captain Torres coordinated rescue operations while trying to maintain his sanity in the face of industrial-scale torture. The hegemony had refined cruelty into a science. April Davis worked as a combat medic, treating beings who had survived months of biological experimentation. Many prisoners were barely alive after serving as test subjects for weapons designed to eliminate their entire species. Her medical training was pushed to its limits. The human advance revealed the full scope of hegemony crimes against galactic civilization. Major Bell's forces discovered mass production facilities creating biological weapons targeting dozens of different species. The aliens planned to sterilize entire star systems. Supreme Commander Vex made his final desperate gambit when human forces surrounded his command bunker. The alien leader activated a dead man's switch that would execute every prisoner in the facility. He expected humans to retreat rather than accept mass casualties. The threat triggered the deadliest aspect of human nature that had been refined through millions of years of evolution on a dangerous world. Morrison ordered immediate assault on all positions, simultaneously accepting massive casualties to save innocent lives. Human forces demonstrated why their species was feared across the galaxy as Deathworlders. They possessed the ability to sacrifice individual survival for collective goals. The concept was alien to hegemony thinking and proved tactically decisive. Murphy's squad fought through seemingly impossible odds to reach the execution chambers. The soldiers moved with desperate fury, knowing that millions of lives depended on their speed. They would not let innocents die on their watch. The final assault on Vex's command center became a masterpiece of human tactical coordination. Multiple units converged on the facility from different directions while air support eliminated defensive positions. The aliens faced opponents who refused to accept defeat. Vex was captured alive after his bodyguards were eliminated by human special forces. The alien commander had expected to die gloriously in battle, but found himself facing trial for crimes against galactic civilization. His empire of genocide was finally broken. Morrison stood in the liberated command center and watched as human forces secured the last hegemony installations. The systematic extermination of intelligent species had finally been stopped after centuries of unchecked murder. The rescue operations revealed the true scale of what humanity had prevented. Millions of beings from dozens of species were freed from concentration camps and experimental facilities. Each survivor represented an entire culture that had been saved from extinction. Dr. Foster organized massive medical operations to treat beings who had endured systematic torture. Many species had been reduced to a few hundred survivors, but they would live to rebuild their civilizations under human protection. Young addressed the assembled alien survivors and delivered humanity's declaration that Earth would protect any species threatened with genocide. The Deathworlders Armada would become the foundation for an interstellar defense pact with humanity as protector of the innocent. The aftermath of the war saw Earth establishing permanent bases throughout the former hegemony territory. Human forces would patrol the region, ensuring that no new genocidal empire could arise. The galaxy had learned that some species would fight for justice regardless of cost. Thelnos spoke for the Zelani when he formally requested alliance with humanity. His people had been saved from extinction by human sacrifice and would never forget that debt. The first alien species had chosen to stand with Earth. Morrison received reports that word of human intervention was spreading across the galaxy. Other species were reaching out to these strange beings who fought not for conquest, but for principle. The reputation of Deathworlders was being redefined. The final scene showed human ships patrolling systems that had once echoed with the screams of genocide victims. Now those same worlds were rebuilding under the protection of Earth's armada.